All right, you happily miserable accursed. Curse of Politics rolls into December like Pierre Poilievre's monologue at the Parliamentary Press Gallery dinner. Feisty, topical, doing our best to appear self-deprecating when we really aren't. Herle's here with Reid and Teneycke and Leichnitz, just back from Berlin. Jordan.
Indeed.
Jordan, tell me what a Christmas market is like.
Oh my God, they're delightful, you guys. Like, and I am not a huge Christmas person, but they're very, okay. Number one, also, it's the kind of thing where in Canada, like if we're gonna do them, it would be at a strip mall, so it wouldn't quite have the same atmosphere, but they're often in really beautiful areas. There's cute little like vendors selling, I don't know, like adorable miniature winter villages. There's caroling. And then, of course, there's the Glühwein. This is like the mulled wine. So you get your like big mug of mulled wine and you walk around and you like
That's an
eat.
acquired taste, isn't it?
No, no, it's amazing. It's like
Oh,
when you're
really?
there, it's fabulous. And then you just like eat nice, fun food and buy cute little things you don't need for Christmas. And it's lovely.
There's a nice one in Toronto, in the distillery district.
Yeah.
That's true. It would be, yes, that one is nice. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but it
Yeah.
doesn't have gingerbread homes deep in the
Yeah.
Black Forest
And is it,
where
like,
they
in
leave
front of,
children
like-
in and then stuff them in the oven. Like, permanent.
Yes, the Grimm's fairy tales are.
I asked
yeah,
because I
very
met
German.
somebody from Germany last week, and they told me that they were going to really miss the Christmas markets. That was the thing they were going to most
Yeah.
miss.
Wow.
Yeah, they are really fun. It was great. I managed. I only had like an afternoon off, but I hit two of them, so that was pretty good.
Yeah.
There's a density also.
All right, so that sounds lovely and wholesome, and very Christmassy. Let's pivot hard to how Scott and Kory spent their Saturday night, right? At a cynical, drunken, I don't even know, what would you even how you would even describe the Parliamentary Press Gallery dinner? A bunch of people.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the ride down there. Sorry.
Did it reach Bacchanal status, guys? I don't know.
I don't know. Well, Reid was I don't know what happened because I wasn't there. Reid was messaging me and then just stopped. So I assume the worst.
No. I didn't go. I
tend to
didn't
assume
go
the
full
best if
lizard.
that
I really
happens.
didn't. But it lasts so long, right? Like by the time the speeches wrap up, it's after 11, and all you want to do. And I will say, I'll make this observation first because Kory had left by this time. Blanchette spoke for in excess of 30 minutes and was as funny as the Chainsaw Massacre movie franchise. Like it was just lethal. People were, and how like a politician can detect a single person in the crowd getting restless, right? And you start to freak out, like if you're that politician. Not him. He didn't give a shit. People were wandering around. People were literally starting by the end just yelling, going, get out the fucking stage. Go away, right? And then Don Davies gets up and opens with this line of, Jesus Christ, Blanchette. If you keep it up, I'm going to vote for separation. Like it was just exactly the tonic the room needed. And Jordan, I will say, Don Davies gave a tight 8 minutes. That was like killer. It was bang, 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 bang.
I did see video. It was phenomenal. Don is actually a very funny guy, but even by his standards, that was top drawer stuff.
Funny guy, 6 seats. Leighton used to bomb at those events, 100 seats.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that's true.
Listen, there's no quality like having nothing to lose up there, right?
I'll go this far. In all honesty, as I pointed out to the table the other night, the first press gallery dinner I went to, I was a summer student in 1989. So we're reaching back into the early chapters of history. And I would say the Davies speech was the funniest speech I've seen at any of these gallery dinners ever. Like it was
Really?
yeah, I thought so.
Well,
I thought it was that, and again, it was 8 minutes long.
I'm regretting maybe leaving, but then also not because I miss Blanchett. I left after Polyev, and I'd seen Kearney, I'd seen Polyev. I figured that was I'd seen Blanchett before, and it was the
So I
same.
started off, so I started off this thing being very cynical about this event, but the truth is, I kind of love this event because it's been around forever. It's one of the great traditions of political Ottawa. I mean, there are great stories about parliamentary press gallery dinners back in the 70s and 60s, and when the gallery used to do skits and etc. I'm glad that Don Newman spoke. You told me, Scott, because
Yeah.
Don has been a big, big part of holding that thing together for many years. But the big news of the night, of course, was unexpectedly Poilievre's appearance. So, the two of you, give us a little color as to how you think that appearance might have changed the kind of coverage he gets from media.
Probably not a whole ton, but I think he did himself some favors with the gallery by showing up. I thought his speech was okay. It's a tough room
You thought it was
for
okay.
anyone.
You thought it was okay. I
Well,
was
like
I was understanding his speech through the eyes of Michelle Rempel
Well,
on Twitter.
in that case,
And
it was
Michelle Rempel
Well,
on
like Bill
Twitter
Pullman
To the
was really
barricades.
having
Independence Day,
difficulty
like-
containing herself and controlling herself. She was so excited about this speech.
Well, I'm not sure what her comedic tastes are, but so maybe there's some difference there. But I would say, like, maybe half the jokes landed in the room, and the half that didn't land in the room, I think it would land really well with his supporters who are not in the room.
Right.
And I think he was trying to put a speech out there that was going to land with both audiences. I think that the part that is, catering to the gallery a bit is just his appearance. Like, I think that is a major departure from, what he would have done if this were, a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I think the feedback that I got around the room was generally positive. And in subsequence to that. So look, I think it's outside of his normal comfort zone, and I think that's a good thing, and he should be trying to do that more. Not everyone in the room liked the jokes that were maybe a little bit more acidic at the folks in the room than would normally be the case, but based on my social media feed, those are the ones that landed the best with the larger conservative universe outside the room, which is not terribly surprising. So I think it's a bit of a balancing act, but I think he did good.
Who among us can say we're always on, working flawlessly with maximum efficiency 100% of the time? Well, it's not me, Hurley Burleyites, and it's not you either, or any human. In the world of AI, it's the rule. Critical AI workloads demand 100% uptime when all systems are just plain working all the time. Any single point of failure, like a broken power line or cooling unit, can bring down the entire system, and that's unacceptable. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, has a long history of engineering their networks to maintain this kind of critical reliability. So, no surprise at all that they've applied that skill to their sovereign AI factory in Rimouski, Quebec, building in layer after layer and then even more layers of redundancy across its critical infrastructure, power, cooling, and connectivity. And so I give you a brief AI factory redundancy primer. The facility uses flywheel energy storage to provide clean, uninterrupted power. If the main power fails, the flywheels use their spinning momentum to instantly generate power, seamlessly bridging the gap until the high-efficiency backup generators start. High-performance AI hardware generates immense heat, so the facility employs a fully redundant cooling infrastructure. 2 independent cooling units are always active. If one unit fails, the other automatically takes over the full load without any interruption. And a reliable network connection to the factory is just as important as the factory itself. So the AI factory features redundant fiber access, multiple separate physical fiber routes for data. If one cable is accidentally cut, their customers' connections will not go down. Hurley Burleyites, had I realized redundancy was such a valuable tool, I'd have practiced it more myself, put it to work, employed it. So TELUS has really taught me something here. TELUS, they're our presenting sponsor, All right, I'll stop now.
I'm going to be more generous and also more severe, because I think there are because I think there are two things happened in his speech, and one of them was very good and one of them was very bad. So, like Kory, I would say very bad is an exaggeration. It's an overstatement. I would say his appearance, his surprise appearance, the presence of a number of members of parliament from his caucus. Steve Outhouse was there, had a chance to have a drink, chat with him. I really wonderful guy. First time we met face to face. So I think it was an important, smart thing to do. It's not going to earn them better coverage. It's not going to change everybody's perception of Pierre Poilievre in an instant. But the fact that, Chris Wilson gets up there doing his 22-hour minutes shtick, and we all thought, okay, well, this is what we're getting instead of Poilievre. And then Poilievre comes out, does the SNL, ooh, I'm surprised I'm my imitator, right? Kind of thing. Shades of Tina Fey. It was that was all fun. So I think all that was great. I like the effort that was made by people to have a presence. And again, it doesn't mean that, oh, well, now the media are going to cover him differently. And it doesn't mean that he's decided that he's pivoting and he's giving into all, the norms of the gallery and like that. But it was just okay, let's be human beings. So I thought it was a good move. His speech should have been 5 minutes shorter, because the longer he went on, the more he undid that, because he couldn't help himself. His jokes became, they came through that lens of him. And so they started to get too acidic, very partisan, not funny, just felt like mean shots as opposed to actual jokes and jibes. And he must have shit on Dave Cochran, about 6 or 7 times in the fucking speech. And it's just all right, enough, lay off. He's a good person. Actually, he's a great person. He's a good buddy. Got to see Dave. So, there's all that. And then the last thing I would say is this: the Michelle thing isn't a mistake. If you notice, there's a concerted, hard push. They are, and I think this is intriguing, they've made a decision. If you look online for the past 24 hours, there's a ton of feeds that are just powering oh my God, he owned the night, he won. And this is not accidental. This is an orchestrated push. And so I think it's interesting that they care enough that they're actually attempting to manufacture a consensus opinion about how he won the night. And I just think that's a little weird and a bit forced. But you know what?
Well,
good on. And I walked over and shook his hand, said, glad to see you here. And he spit in my eye.
I'm sure that made him nice. I was going to say, sure. Yeah.
Love that.
And he was
you say that like you were doing him a favor,
nice.
Scott.
He was fine. I was like, hey, man, glad to see you're here. And he was like, well, I hope you're in a car accident. But we understood each other.
Well, I'll tell you the best part of the night for me personally was just by happenstance was placed next to Joe Clark for the dinner. Yes. And I got to get all the dirt on all the conservatives of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and what was up in this situation or that situation, or what do you think of this person or that person. I had a very interesting conversation about Preston Manning and what their relationship was like. It was quite fascinating, actually, and really good chat with him.
It was terrific to see him.
Joe's a fascinating guy
to see him. And by the way, David,
sharp as a tack too.
Pardon me?
He's sharp as a tack.
Oh yeah, he was.
He's
that's not what they said in 1976.
Marie McTeer was there. She reminded me that I'll never be a sommelier, but still, it was great to see her. But Mr. Clark, but David, just between us, right? Because you and I share an obsession with the Coots Diaries, and I know you had Ron Graham on. Loved. I hope everybody listens to it. I hope everybody.
It was great.
The Coots Diaries, but I asked Clark about it. And I hadn't realized how well he and Coots knew one another. And he told us that they ran a community newspaper together, which isn't in the diaries, but is mentioned in passing. I think that's what Ron was referring to in his interview with you.
Yeah.
So it was very funny listening to that just after hearing Mr. Clark talking about his impression of Coots, back in the 50s and 60s, of what kind of guy he was and stuff. So
they're both from small town Alberta. So
yeah.
Jordan, you had something to say.
Well, I was just going to say about Poilievre, and I think Scott hit on something significant there, but I would actually take it a bit further. So obviously I wasn't there. I was on a plane, but just watching the video afterwards, and the fact also that he is pushing this video and all of the kind of conservative outlets and platforms are pushing this video. I think number one, internally, so for folks who were there, I think he's being heavily graded on a curve, okay, because the bar was on the ground in terms of his ability to laugh at himself. So that's probably helpful for him. But what's more interesting is the fact that this is being pushed out externally as him sort of like owning the press gallery. Like really that, that
Is that
idea.
what you go there for? Is that the point? Is that
well, that's it. It's not.
But that's
right?
why it's messaged
and
explicitly.
That's why, yeah, and that's the message that they're pushing out publicly facing, which actually like negates any sort of benefit that you would get out of this in terms of demonstrating that you have more than a 2D personality on this. So I think that actually like Rempel Garner's reactions, which were really very unhinged on Twitter, is exactly what they were trying to draw out. And therein lies the contradiction of this strategy. Like, yes, this guy does have a personality. The problem is he's just a dick. Like, that's the personality. So anyway, they had an opportunity to go to a different place and did not.
Own the dinner. Like, what would they be trying to say now that he's the funniest person?
No, but that he's like owning
No, it's like
the
he
gallery.
shoved it up their ass.
He's going after the gallery. He's like
Oh, I
speaking,
see. Oh, yeah.
I
taking
wonder if that's a
down all
defensive
those
move.
media
Like,
elites.
Like, I wonder if it's a defensive move because they're like worried,
Maybe.
well, the base might see that he went there. So they have to make a point of saying the reason he went there was to dunk on them, right?
I think that's part of it. I think that's part of it.
And they're
But
too fucking in their heads then.
but
Like,
but how I think you can overstate how deliberate and organized these things are with respect to that. That is just frankly the view that a lot of conservatives have of the mainstream media and the gallery generally. And so I don't think it's like some agenda that, is coming out of nowhere. I think there's part of the conservative base that think that way and have always thought that way. And there's nothing new about any of that. And that's how they'll see those jokes landing. And, as I say, I think some of them landed well in the room and some of them landed well outside the room. But like there are two audiences if you're a conservative going to that dinner. And I think he was, you don't understand what he was doing there if you only look at through one lens. You got to look at through both.
So anyone whose parents were members of the greatest generation probably remembers stories about what defined a treasured seasonal gift back in the early 20th century. Oranges were particularly valued, apparently, rare and prized. This sounds weird today. You can buy a bag of oranges anytime. But in the years after the Great War, the fruit came all the way from Japan. The annual arrival of Satsuma oranges in Canada was a major event covered in the media. It was considered the start of the holiday season. How did they arrive? By ship, usually at Vancouver, then made their way across Canada by rail. The voyage took weeks. How they were kept fresh is another story. Anyway, those orange shipments, now lost in time, rolled to stores on the tracks of our sponsor, CN. Nowadays, of course, all manner of citrus streams into the country, still carried by trains on CN's tri-coastal network. Actually, looking around your home this holiday season, you will see CN cargo everywhere, whether you know it or not. Last year, CN moved about 2,000 rail cars of wrapping paper. That's 20-mile-long trains. About 1,700 cars loaded with toys. I won't crack wise here about the size of CN's sled. Speaking of which, CN also hauls sleds. CN's locomotives carried about 50,000 Christmas trees last year, most of them from Nova Scotia. One CN rail car can carry about 900 trees. Drop that factoid and impress family members. And once the trees have gone into the chipper in January, CN will haul the chips away to make wood pulp. Milk and cookies and sweaters and ornaments and turkeys. Yes, hundreds of thousands of frozen turkeys. Candles and chestnuts, firewood to make that open fire. Like many things Canadians consume, it will travel by rail. Am I saying here that Christmas would not happen without CN? Heavens no. Trains cannot haul goodwill and peace. But the trimmings, that's always been another story. All right, so let's get on with the show. As much fun as that was. Let's get on with the show. What we got for the show today is the big political news of last week, which is the Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, Pipeline deal the Fed struck with Alberta. Many, many angles coming out of that. Gilbo, Smith, EB will break it all down. And relatedly, we'll talk about Jason Markusov's piece for CBC News, how Danielle Smith's deal with Ottawa will go over with her anti-Ottawa base, and then we'll finally do our hey yous once Mr. Pinson calls us in to do that. But let me start with a very broad question about this MOU, this deal between Carney and Smith, between the federal government and the Alberta government. Because I suspect that Kory might think it's a little cold and Jordan might think it's a little hot, I'm going to start with the person most likely to think the porridge is at the exactly right temperature. Scott Reid, was this an accomplishment for the Carney government?
Oh, I think so. I think it's an interesting and maybe potentially very significant accomplishment in terms of policy making and maybe even, sort of macroeconomics. But we won't know until a whole series of political events unfold. We won't know until a whole series of financial, business, commercial decisions and development decisions are made. We just won't know. And we won't know for maybe 4, 7, 11 years. So I look at it as a piece in a weird way with the budget. I think both of them you can view as almost ostentatiously apolitical in the sense that, or at least unpartisan, right? Like and I don't just mean because he's dealing with Danielle Smith. I mean, like if you were trolling for votes and if you were measuring your next step based on how does it work, what's the Venn diagram of my existing voter base versus the voter base I care about, what about which seats are vulnerable, which seats are not vulnerable, all that, it would be hard to rationalize the decisions that were made in the budget or the decisions that were made with this MOU, because you would for sure say there are more seats at risk in BC and Quebec than there are elsewhere here, or there's to be gained. He's not going to sweep Alberta. And so I look at it and I think, well, one, the Prime Minister's doing this because he thinks this is the necessary response structurally to the challenges we face. To me, the most interesting thing about it, and there could be political risk, could be substantial political risk, obviously you lose your Quebec lieutenant. It's easy for us to just shrug our shoulders. That's a big deal, when you lose your Quebec lieutenant. And Guilbeault was there on Saturday night, and he's in Tout le monde le parle last night.
As unpopular as Guilbeault is in Kory Teneycke's house, he is equally popular in most of Quebec.
Or at least significant. And so you can't just shrug your shoulders about it. But here's the thing that I would really emphasize. I come back to my hobby horse on this. I think, the Prime Minister is a technocrat, and he does start in the middle. And so you see him and his messaging on this, eager to point out to people that clauses 13 through 22 mean this and that and this, and he reassures people. And sometimes, if it's a question about, well, are you selling out the environmentalists? He wants to message about how significant carbon capture is, and if he's getting pushed on, well, you're not doing enough, and this thing will never happen. He starts to push back on the risk that's been taken by removing clean energy regs and so on and so forth. So to me, the big thing is the big thing. And the big thing has to be, listen, God damn it. One, I told you my focus would be relentlessly dedicated to economic priorities. And these are the kinds of things we're going to have to do. And two, never forget. The United States is no longer the reliable partner. And if we want to have independence of options, we are going to have to give ourselves these things so that we can sell our bitumen and our LNG to Asia. And that gives us choices. That means that we're no longer as beholden to the United States, because for 30 years, we put every egg in their basket. And I don't hear that message. And I know sometimes I think the government says, well, we got to be careful because we don't want to set Trump off. But on the other hand, I think there's ways to message this that are crystal clear to Canadians. And I just think you have a get out of jail free card for doing this and minimizing political risk and maybe even maximizing enthusiasm for this. If you say, this is going to be one of 5 things I'm going to do over the next 9 months that will make good on the promise that we are going to break away and give ourselves options independent of the United States in terms of economic choice. And it's not going to be easy. And it won't be a matter of universal consensus. And there's going to be political risk and hardship. But these are the things we have to do. Otherwise, we just continue to live at the whim of Donald Trump, and that's no fucking way to live. And I just don't hear that message enough, and I think they really need to hammer that.
Hey, Kory, this is as Scott said, this is not obvious checkers politics in the sense that you're not trading BC seats for Alberta seats. That doesn't make any sense in this calculation. Does that mean it's bad politics inherently? Is this a bad thing politically for Carney to have done?
No, not at all. I largely agree with Scott. Like, look, the one big thing he got elected on is the one big thing that he's doing. And frankly, this is the only major project announced in these lists of major projects that actually is major and new. Like, re-announcing mines that are already in progress, or talking about an SMR that's already under construction. Like, none of that shit's new. Like, it may be important, it may be, thematically along the lines of the things they want to do, but none of those things are new.
Right.
They're not new. This is the first new thing. And if this is not what he was talking about in the last election, I don't know what is, right? Like, it is a diversification of markets in a major way. People will point to, well, we were doing LNG. LNG doesn't have a fucking fraction the value that oil does in the marketplace, and in terms of what that will mean for GDP. So, like, it's not, the small stuff is not the big stuff. We need to do big stuff, and we need to do a lot more of it. So look, if you're just going to do the math of Alberta versus BC, I think you're missing the point on what Carney was campaigning on and what the opportunity is. I think this will be better for him in Ontario than it'll be worse in BC. Like, I think the way it'll be viewed across the country is different than the way it'll be in any one market. And I'm sure we'll get talking about BC, but I don't think this is a bad news thing for him in BC. Like, you look at the polling around pipelines in BC, and, what's the biggest swimming pool to fish in? The one that's 70% of the public, not the one that's 30%. EB is swimming in the little swimming pool with some other people, like the Greens. I don't think that math is mathing very well for them in the long term. So, I think it's smart, and I don't see what the alternative to doing that is if you're going to actually fulfill your larger commitment that you made during the election campaign.
Now that the wait is over for the so-called grand bargain between Alberta and the federal government, we have more to chew on in terms of climate policy and the clean economy. Our sponsor, the Canadian Climate Institute, has some perspective of its own to share. First, let's recap what happened. Along with a pipeline commitment, Alberta gets a suspension of the federal clean electricity regulations, plus a delay of stronger methane rules in the oil and gas sector. The oil and gas emissions cap will not go ahead. The Pathways carbon capture project would proceed alongside said pipeline. There are a number of additional pieces here, too many to list, but it's worth noting it also includes a promise to strengthen Alberta's industrial carbon pricing system. That part is positive and critically important, according to the Climate Institute. Alberta's industrial carbon pricing system covers 25% of Canada's total national emissions. So what happens with this system matters for the rest of the country. All told, you'd think we'd have more clarity on a range of issues, but there is still big uncertainty that lies ahead. Not only are many of the actual policy details still to come, set for April 1, 2026, but the special treatment for Alberta on clean electricity sends a signal to other provinces that it's open season for copycat demands on other key climate policies. The risk is a race to the bottom that creates a dysfunctional patchwork of exemptions. In fact, it's already started with some provinces signaling they expect similar treatment. And it's inconsistent with the federal government's own climate competitiveness strategy released earlier this month. Again, all of this according to the Canadian Climate Institute. In their view, the federal government now needs to protect these minimum national standards. If they don't, we'll start to see a wholesale unraveling of Canada's climate policy architecture. More at climateinstitute.ca. So, Jordan, what's your take on this? And let me just sort of say that from a I actually don't look at this and say that you can see any part of this that was driven by politics. I'm trying to see if you can reverse engineer it to be political. And because the math of the reaction in Quebec and the reaction in BC versus what's to be gained is in Alberta is obvious. I guess the broader question for me is all of this stuff positioning Carney as the governor of the country, as the natural government of the country? Is he cementing himself in such a centrist leadership managerial position that that politics is very strong as opposed to the individual seat calculations?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty convoluted way to reverse engineer it, I think. But I agree with your premise there. What really struck me about this deal is that you have to evaluate it really on two levels. As a deal, like almost as the agreement on paper and the various trade-offs and the pieces that were moved in that negotiation. And then as a political piece, but separately, because clearly the emphasis on the part of the federal government was on that negotiation. And I do think that if you look at what happened between Smith and Carney there, like, it's interesting. There was true negotiations, there was true compromise on both sides to get to that, but we are still in a place where that project is maybe like it's a little more real than it was, but it's still very far off, right? There's still quite a bit that remains to be filled in. And although I'm sure that the negotiations were challenging to get to this point, in some sense, this was the easy part of this deal. And the idea that we are going to end up with a North Coast pipeline still is quite far off, both politically and practically. And so I think that, on paper, I can see that this is satisfying for Carney in terms of how he understands his mandate around major projects and his desire to pull in provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan. But politically, I think that there was a lot of things that were just not attended to in this agreement that could certainly end up coming back to haunt him. And one is the obvious trade-off between the seats in BC, of which there are 20, and the two that are in Alberta. So that math is not great for them. But I would also add to that is, of course, Quebec is a big other factor in this. Guilbeault's departure is extremely significant in Quebec. It is a very troubling sign for progressives in Quebec. And the people happiest out of this agreement, I think, are probably going to end up being the Bloc. Because it provides a really big opening for them. And I think that the challenge for Carney is he the governor of Canada? Like, he's a deal maker, right? He has always seen himself as such, and this is very much in line with that. But the problem is that he has not been able to articulate, like, do you actually want to see this project built? Like, are you actually in favor of this pipeline? There has not been a clear answer to that. And so he is not yet like reaping the benefits of that. He wants to have this sort of, we're going to have our cake and eat it too, where we're going to set the conditions and then we're going to basically back off. And Alberta will have nothing to complain about because we've taken those impediments away. And now it's up to them to secure a private sector proponent and go forward. But he's done that without being attentive to the opposition in BC, without being attentive to the dynamics on the ground with the coastal First Nations, in a way that I think will have ramifications politically, but also have ramifications for the idea that this project could ever actually see the light of day. Like, if you were truly interested in getting this to a finish line, you would attend to those things in a more even-handed way, which he did not. So I think that this is something where, again, on paper, the agreement, I think, is very satisfying to Carney and a lot of the objectives that he's brought to the role. But politically, it leaves open some pretty big vulnerabilities for him that will unspool over time. And whether Smith actually stays within the coalition of the pleased in this is not at all clear. Like, that is not a long-term guarantee. She's happy today. He's getting a standing ovation at the Calgary Chamber of Commerce today, but I would invite us to revisit in a year, and I suspect it will be a different circumstance.
Scott, are we looking at a very different kind of government than we're used to looking at? Because most governments have tons of people who are like us, very political, at the center, who are talking about politics all the time and assessing everything through politics. And, when you do that, there's more reason not to do things than there is to do things generally. There's more risk associated with things than there is potential reward. And I can see how you and I would have talked this thing into the ground um, in certain circumstances. Um, are we looking at a government that really doesn't consider these kinds of things?
I don't think
Doesn't
so.
really have serious conversations about these kinds of things?
Well, I don't know how big and how loud the conversations are because you have to be really inside to understand that and what's the culture and what sort of permission is given for a discussion. So if the prime minister says, listen, I feel really strongly about it, and I believe he felt really strongly about doing it. The reason I believe that is that it's not a bullshit 1.5 page checklist. It is a genuine memorandum of understanding with substantial clauses. And I mean, like clean electricity regs, just to take an item that hasn't gotten as much attention, is a big fucking deal. Like it really is a big policy piece here. And by the way, we may find, despite all the protestations, people will say, well, God, nobody was more dedicated to climate than the Trudeau government. This may actually be much more substantial than any of that. I mean, if you look at, like, if he actually gets carbon capture, which, by the way, is supposed to be negotiated on the 1st of April, right, 2026, right? If that starts moving, and if you actually get real substantial gains in that area, you may say, well, and you're getting the government of Alberta, Danielle Smith, to sign on to, industrial carbon pricing. Those are significant developments. And you might say, well, gosh, actually, as compared to a consumer carbon tax that everyone hated and created a rallying point for the defeat of a climate agenda, and maybe this is actually really substantive. My point is, what I'm saying is not what the prime minister should be saying. My point is, I think they have these conversations, David, at least among themselves, whether they challenge the prime minister and say, boss, you got to think about this and this and this and this. I think the politics shows up when they say things like, and I'm picking up on something that Jordan said, when they say things like, listen, these are the conditions, this sets the table for the conditions to be met. Doesn't mean the conditions are sufficient, all that stuff. I think that's where they think they're playing politics. I think that's where you hear the hand of the advisors saying, well, you can take because then you don't have to completely hold responsibility for this, boss, right? Like, you've just set the table. Now it's up to the private sector and the government of Alberta to work it out and all that sort of stuff. And you can take a step back. And I don't think you get the benefit if you play it that way. To my mind, if your thesis politically, because you've decided we're doing this regardless of the politics, so then you say, well, okay, well, then what's the gain here? Well, the gain is to be with, as Kory points out, the 70% of people who respond, yeah, I'd like to see major projects done bigger and done faster than we have for 50 years. Okay. In order to do that, you have to say that's what you're doing. In order to say you're doing that, you can't be stepping away or mealy mouth or sort of saying sufficient conditions versus potential conditions, and no one knows what the fuck that means. It sounds like doublespeak. So to me, I think the prime minister should go out there and say, I am 100% dedicated to this. I want to see this happen. Here's why I want to see this happen, because America can't be our only option anymore, because America ain't reliable, because it's led by people who wear MAGA hats and vote for Donald Trump. And so, like, I think you have to take the risk politically of making that argument if you've decided that this is the course you're going to go on, and they've decided this is the course they're going to go on.
Did you know that Canada is a global leader in the production of medical isotopes? Canadian isotopes are life-saving tools used around the world every day to diagnose and treat cancers, sterilize medical equipment, and advance medical research. For decades, Canadian nuclear innovation has powered breakthroughs across healthcare, industry, and research. And today, through the Isotopes for Hope campaign, the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council is working to double our isotope production by 2030. Why? Because the world is counting on Canada. Medical isotopes are a promise that patients will get faster, more accurate diagnoses, a promise that hospitals will have the tools they need to precisely treat cancer and other diseases, and a promise that Canada will continue to lead in the development of nuclear technologies that benefit people here at home and around the world. From our CANDU power reactor fleet to our accelerator network, from research labs to hospitals, Canadians are driving innovation that brings hope and saves lives. By supporting Isotopes for Hope, we're not only securing Canada's leadership in the global isotope market, but we're also helping build a healthier future for everyone. The world is counting on us, but we can only rise to this challenge if we work together. It will take all of us, industry, the healthcare sector, governments, and the scientific community, all aligned to maximize the potential of Canadian-made isotopes and ensure that we continue to bring hope to patients when they need it most. Learn more at www.canadianisotopes.ca. Jordan, I don't really believe that EB was as out of the loop as this has all been publicly portrayed to be. In part because that doesn't really make any sense to me at all. In part because I know that in order to accede to it, any BC premier would need to put up some sort of a fight. Even Christy Clark had 5 conditions for a pipeline. And lastly, because he's already moved on to negotiations about terms. So what is the BC government's play here?
Well, I think, I don't have any reason to disbelieve that EB was not left out of important details of the agreement. I think there's a level of granularity there that they were maybe not brought into until fairly late in the game. And in that, he would be right to be pissed because all of this is very, very impactful in BC. And look, I think for BC, they've been pretty clear that the North Coast, the tanker ban for them is what they need to protect. EB needs to protect it politically, but they also view it as the linchpin for First Nations support of their LNG projects, which is all pretty relatively new and relatively fragile. And so his line has been that this puts at risk some of these very real projects that are actually underway, and that's not a trade-off that he's willing to make. But I would say that, and this is not new since last week, but the BC government has been signaling that there is an alternative that they view as more palatable as opposed to a North Coast route, and that's to increase the capacity in TMX, right? So you're talking there about using an existing pipeline route, maybe, running another pipe along there, and that for them has been kind of the saw off that I think they're hoping to land on. And of course, if you want to talk about what project would actually come to fruition quickly, if again, the context here is a trade war with the United States and making sure that we're diversifying our markets and not sending another pipeline south as we would be with Keystone, which was floated a couple months ago, well, then that proposal ticks a lot of boxes. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the BC government trying to steer things in that direction, because the other reality here is that the people who hold really the most cards in BC on a North Coast project, that's the Coastal First Nations. And they have been very clear. There is almost nothing. There is nothing that could be done to win their support for this. So it's almost a non-starter. And the government federally certainly hasn't done anything to help set the table to change any of that with the Coastal First Nations. In fact, they've done the opposite. So I think that there's other ways that the goals could be accomplished here, and that the BC government is not going to die on a hypothetical hill of no project, but is rather going to try to steer the conversation in a place that they think is more beneficial for them.
Kory, I'm going to get weird on you.
Sure.
I'm going to get weird on you here. I'm wondering whether this isn't actually quite urgent, because the other supplier of the kind of heavy bitumen that comes out of the oil sands that the United States has a number of processing facilities for, the other supplier of that is Venezuela.
Yep, exactly.
And I am watching what's happening with the United States and Venezuela with some alarm.
Yeah.
And it may not be long before the United States is in a position to tell us they don't actually need our oil.
I think there's a big amount of that going on. I think there's a connection between all of these things to a certain degree. I think the U.S. hears us talking about wanting to send more of our oil to Asia, and there are very big economic consequences of that for the refining industry in Houston and in the United States. And there's all this Venezuelan oil sitting right there, and with a very unpopular regime. Venezuela also, I think you got to look at it as a part of the migrant crisis. Like the millions and millions of people that have found their way to the United States as a result of political instability in Venezuela. One of the ways that you fix that migrant problem is you stabilize Venezuela to some degree, get rid of the regime. And so I think there's a bit of both that are probably at play in that. But look, I want to come back to the politics of this particular proposal a little bit. When I look at the polling, I just come up with a very different read than what I've heard from a lot of commentators out there. When you look at where environment and concern around climate change is relative to where it has been historically.
Wait, I'm just going to put up my hand because I want to redirect this, because I'm just going to insert right now and say there are almost no votes in Canada right now for emissions reduction. And the
Correct.
climate opposition to this plan will not be the environmental opposition, sorry, to this plan will not be driven by climate. It will be driven by oil, by water and land
Yes.
and concerns
Yes, and
about
it's
the
very
pipeline
Tanker
regional.
in
bans,
very
sharks.
localized
That's
areas, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, all right, but that's not the argument that I've heard made out there.
Oh, I know, but anybody who's arguing on the climate side is going to lose that argument.
That's
Well,
I've pulled that. I know that.
well, okay, great. So we're agreeing.
Yeah.
We're agreeing. And the only thing that's less persuasive is First Nations opposition. That is even less persuasive to Canadians. So like
Yeah, but it's not about public opinion, Kory. It's about litigation.
Okay, well, look, I listened to everyone else's take. You guys can suffer through mine. I think, I just think that the politics of this are where the people are, where the most people are, same as every other campaign, every other issue.
Okay.
And there are things that are driving voting behavior right now. They're largely around the economy. When they're not around affordability, they're around fear of Trump and fear of what the Americans are going to do to our economy. And I think if you're looking at what got Carney elected, it's not the affordability side of that, it's the other side. I think this is the most rational political move that you could see the Carney government make. Like I've used in some other appearances, like the expression, the favorite Lincoln expression, a house divided against itself cannot stand, right? You can't have part of your cabinet doing the Gregor Robertson, Stephen Guilbeault, anti-pipeline, anti-development shtick, and then pursue what you actually saved the Liberal Party over and got elected prime minister to do, which is to do all of those things. And so I actually see the jettisoning of Guilbeault in particular, but I think it should be extended to Gregor Robertson and some others, is a natural flow of the election campaign, of what the agenda Carney got elected to do being implemented. And I just don't think you can ride both those horses at the same time, no matter how good a cowboy you are. Like, you got to pick which horse you're going to ride, and you got to ride it. And the votes, the mandate, all of that are not on the no pipelines Trudeau shtick. They're in the opposite of that. They're in the opposite of that. So I think he's doing the right thing, and I think Eby's going to get fucking steamrolled if he doesn't soften his approach. And I already, even today, a few days after this happened, you're seeing Eby soften his approach quite dramatically.
Yeah, I generally agree with that. That's all. It's practically my point, right? Which is that if you're gonna do this, and you got to throw yourself into it and go get the 70% of people that agree with you, rather than backing into it by spending all your time worrying about where the coalition or where the arguments against this coalition are going to come from. And and sometimes liberals do that because we're always triangulating, we're always in the middle, and we're always kind of, okay, all right, now that we've decided this, let's go out and spend most of our attention and worry on those that are opposed to the policy and try to reassure them why they ought not to be. And then you forget to message the big thing. The big thing is the fucking big thing. And you got to keep pounding on that economic message and that building message, and particularly the US threat message. The only thing I would say that I disagree with Kory on is because Kory wants to drive Guilbeault out. He wants to drive Gregor out. He wants to drive out everybody except Tim Hodgson. And it's a vulnerable forest that only has one kind of tree, right? So, I mean, I think you keep those people in your cabinet, but you go out there and you sell that message hard.
The following message is brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Not all nicotine products carry the same risk. Smoke-free alternatives like heated tobacco, vaping products, and nicotine pouches don't burn tobacco or produce smoke. While not risk-free, evidence shows they have the potential to be significantly less harmful than cigarettes. Yet, Canadian regulations restrict access and limit communication about these alternatives, keeping adult smokers in the dark. Sweden has accepted this science, embraced smoking harm reduction, and driven smoking rates below 6%. Canada has the tools to do the same, but it requires political will. It's time to align regulation with science, expand access to smoke-free products, and empower Canadians to make informed choices. The evidence is clear. The opportunity is real. Canada can be smoke-free. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.
You know what? Guilbeault has impressed me as a partisan liberal over the last number of days, because he's not going out the way an activist might have been anticipated to go out. He's going out the way a partisan would go out, in the sense that he's not blowing the whole thing to smithereens. He's not leaving the caucus. He's not joining somebody else. He's not trying to create foment against the government. He's just leaving the cabinet because it would be impossible for him to look people in the eye after all the things he said over the years and be in the cabinet. But he's being constructive about it, I would say.
I had at least
yeah. I mean, it's almost like he was
three
earnest
cabinet
in
ministers
his...
say that to me on Saturday night, and they said it with relief.
Yeah,
because they're worried about the opposite.
I'm going to pick up what Kory's putting down here, because I think that I agree that they can't ride both horses. But look, they've picked a horse, right? Like there is no pretense that they are trying to maintain any connection to the Trudeau legacy on fucking anything, guys. And I would say that this is not an unequivocal good for them, because it's exactly as Scott says. You end up with just one type of pillar of support for your party then. And Kory, I don't think it's also a good or safe recommendation to just over-index kind of public opinion on pipeline policy on this, because there's other things at play here too. What this is about is not just pipeline, but it's more broadly also about, yes, regionally about oil spills and environmental safety. It's also about climate policy, because let's not kid ourselves. The carve-outs that Alberta is getting here on emissions policy, those are now available to every other province. So like, we have just basically decided that this is like not a thing that we're serious about doing anymore. We're going to be pulling back on global emissions targets, all of those things. So they have picked a lane here. And they've also picked a lane on many other things, like on feminist policy. They've picked a lane on everything, right? And it is all anti-Trudeau.
Don't name all the popular things at once here.
I know. I'm threatening you with a good time, Kory, like, which is by the way, well,
are we going to get into plastic straws? Is like the next thing.
The biggest loser of all
meal
of this.
programs.
The biggest loser out of all of this is Pierre Poilievre, I would say. He has definitely been the biggest loser of this whole thing. But listen, I'm not done. The idea here that you can campaign as one type of leader, as the guy who wrote values, as the warm and
Let's
fuzzy...
pretend that any voter had read values and voted for him on the basis of that.
But
David, they haven't. They haven't.
Not what he campaigned on.
But he absolutely did campaign as somebody who was in touch with those issues, who had a thorough understanding of how to reconcile business with climate imperatives. He absolutely campaigned on somebody who was more multidimensional than the type of leader than we are seeing right now. Well, that's what you heard, Kory, but that's not what a lot of the New Democrat voters who voted for him, that's not what a lot of the people in BC on the Lower Mainland who voted for him heard, and that's not what a lot of people in Quebec and even in some parts of urban Ontario heard. So there's a danger here in leaning too heavily on the idea that just because a majority of people are interested in a
Not a
pro-pipeline policy,
majority. It's
that
more than a
means
super majority.
that
More
means
than a
that you
super
can huck
majority.
out all the rest of it. He is better when he has a multi-dimensional personality, and that is increasingly lacking in his leadership style.
Jordan, I would argue that he ran on a platform of making sure Canada remained independent from the United States and rebuilding Canada's economy in the face
Bingo.
of the 10 years of or longer of decline and the Trump threat, that was his promise. And I think that if he's got a political weakness, it's that he doesn't talk about that enough. That's what he's doing.
Yeah,
Well, I agree that he doesn't talk about that enough, but especially when you're putting things like this in the window that
But
do
this is-
represent a sacrifice among your base of voters, you got to tell that story, and he's not.
The base of voters for the bullshit, Trudeau narrative around the economy and feminism and fucking banning plastic straws.
But all
and
that
all
shit
of that
I don't
crazy
like.
shit is like
Fuck
that.
the
They
stuff
would've
I'm
had-
not for.
They would have had 2 seats, Jordan. Like we know where that path ends.
Kory,
Ends
I'm
in
not
political
suggesting that he beat
oblivion.
Trudeau. I'm suggesting that he
Oblivion.
remember who the fuck
Well,
brought him into power.
the only people I hear that from, frankly, out there for the most part, are people who are lamenting that he's not the Trudeau government. Well, nobody in Canada wanted the fucking Trudeau government by the time it left. You couldn't find, 10 liberals to put in a room to defend what was going on at that time. So the fact that he's doing the opposite of that, I don't like saying that there was a liberal base for it. Where? Like there was a path to fucking absolute political oblivion.
I think
road.
Katy Perry liked the Trudeau government.
Well, yeah, but like she hasn't had a hit since he was popular, and that's a long time ago.
I don't know.
Yeah, there's
Nobody
a joke
hears.
about there's
Nobody
a joke
hears
about
her.
has-beens
Nobody hears
to
her
be
roar
made.
anymore. Nobody hears her roar. Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. I want to move on because I think that Danielle Smith deserves some of our time. And I want to just start with this an excerpt from this Jason Markusoff piece in CBC. Current party president Rob Smith has publicly estimated that the United Conservative Party base is 2/3 to 75% separatist. Mitch Sylvester is a leader of that large faction. He is not only CEO of the separatist group Alberta Prosperity Project, but he's also the UCP constituency president in Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul, the rural northeast riding that perennially sends more members to the convention than any other district. It's basically a useless piece of paper as far as I'm concerned, the separatist leader told CBC News in an interview. It doesn't guarantee a pipeline gets built or federal climate regulations get lifted, he reasoned. Nobody's going to be fooled by a memorandum of understanding. That's not a victory. That's not even a talking point. So, Carney got a standing ovation from the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. She got this kind of reaction from her party at its convention. What are the politics of this for her, Kory? Why did she do this?
Well, because despite the claims made by the little emperor from Bonnyville or whatever the fuck, whoever the fuck that guy is, the majority of people who work in the petroleum industry and the energy industry and the business community who are Albertans are not down with separatism, and that is, Bonnyville's in the riding, I believe, where Polyev just ran in a by-election in which they got a couple of percentage of the vote, despite, saying that, 2/3 of the people there are separatists. Well, not when there's an election, apparently. I think that there's some problems in how they structured the UCP in terms of the amount of, the balance between control that the leadership has of the party and the amount of grassroots democracy you want to have. They have an extreme grassroots democratic constitution, and it produces these wild conventions. But my understanding, even in that, Smith ended up winning most of the executive positions, or her team did. But it creates these sort of wild spectacles. Despite those claims, when you actually look at what happens in an election campaign, the separatists are not doing well in Alberta, and they're going to be doing a hell of a lot less well as a result of this MOU. I think if there was no MOU, if Carney, was channeling Trudeau policies, then I think there would be a lot of wind in the sails of those separatists. But the exact opposite is happening. And so, like, I think Smith comes out of that MOU in a much stronger political position. The people who are shit talking the MOU and the chances that anything is going to come from it are of two varieties. They're Western separatists and there are folks in like the EB camp who don't want it to happen. Like but what does the Alberta public want? They want it to happen. What does the Canadian public want? They want it to happen. Like not just a majority, when we say, well, a majority want this. No, a fucking super majority want it. Like we're talking 70+% in most of the country. So like I think she is in, when you're siding with, those kinds of numbers, you're in a strong political position. And, I think it's good news for Smith. I think she looks like a winner coming out of this. I think her team feels like they, that this is, well, not everything they wanted, very workable. And, I think good news day for her.
Scott, I want to give her some credit. We've trash talked her on this show a lot, and I want to give her some credit because I was in Calgary last week before the MOU came out. And I was in a meeting with business people, not separatists, business people in Calgary, and they were highly skeptical of Carney still. Some wanted to believe more than others, but throughout the whole group, there was a ton of skepticism. And it feels to me like the easiest political route for her would have been to marry that skepticism to the opposition in her party. Because if she'd remained skeptical of Carney, I think that business community would have remained skeptical of Carney. It's her endorsement of him that makes this work in Alberta. And that, I think, took some courage on her part.
I think it did. And I don't think we should overlook the fact that from a substantive standpoint, there's also real concessions in this MOU for her. I mean,
industrial carbon price is a massive,
carbon price. It is a monstrous
give.
And if I was those separatist guys, they all sort of go with like, bumper sticker sort of slogans. I think they should be using that thing to beat her senseless politically. But I agree with you. There's real courage there. And I think it may be very problematic for her because the odds against this happening are still enormously high, just because like the prime minister has accepted the challenge of saying, well, if you were serious about this, you would do X, Y, and Z. And he's all right, we got X, Y, and Z. I want carbon capture and pricing and exchange. He got that. That's fine. But he took those things out of the way.
Scott, what's C5 for if not this piece?
Exactly. Right.
What is it for if not this piece?
For sure. So, but exactly it's still really, really hard to see, like, there's just, at least I put it this way, there's still many, many, many things. You got to deal with the price of fucking oil, right? Like, you have to think about, there's a million reasons why this may not work commercially. And it just could not to say the opposition in the BC coastal communities, BC coastal chiefs, and so on and so forth. So she is taking a real risk, and because a year and a half from now, there could be a lot of I told you so's. And look at her convention this weekend. Yeah, she gets booed. Not only that, sure, Rob Smith got reelected as president, but the majority of the table officers are separatists. Like they won, their slate won the fucking table officer vote. And so you go like, this party, they've constructed something that feels like it's mission built to replace its leaders on an almost constant basis, because unless you're literally some kind of like constant freedom fighter who's just going to be like trying to overthrow anything, how do you get it? And we saw Jason Kenney on the weekend, and he was just sort of shaking his head looking at this going, like, fuck, I don't know how you manage these guys politically. And people could say, well, that's sour grapes. But I also think it's sound analysis because it looks
it's not sour grapes. He created the whole project. I love Jason, but when you talk about Kory's point about how that thing is constructed, that's Jason.
Yeah, they made a real error, but I think Jason would say that they made some mistakes in how they crafted that constitution.
No, really?
But it's real political risk for her, because there can be a lot of those people saying, aha, you've given us the hammer that we're going to swing at you in a year and a half.
And you know who else showed courage? Fucking Nenshi. Because this is the kind of politics that the country needs at this point in time, which is Nenshi says, you know what? That looks like a good deal.
Yeah, totally.
That looks like something
Well, I
we
mean,
should
look,
all get
he
behind in
He
Alberta.
also knows where his future bread is buttered, so I think that was the smart play for him politically as well. But yeah, I mean,
Wait,
How
what's
often
that
do
mean?
people take it? How often do people take it, Jordan?
Well, what's that mean
I
exactly?
wasn't
You're
saying
like, so
that,
he's.
Scott.
Are you saying he's going to lose the next election? He needs a job somewhere? Is that what you meant? I don't know.
I'm
what you
not, but
meant.
it probably doesn't hurt to have insurance, right?
Yeah.
But
Well,
look,
what
you
I
know,
I never make the smart move.
No, he needs to win Calgary, and that will be the
there you go.
position in
Exactly.
Calgary.
Like
Yeah.
he can't be anti-pipeline. He can't, right? But look, I think for Smith, you know, it's interesting because there was a lot of commentary that was suggesting that this was somehow going to placate or diffuse like the separatism in the party, and there's really no evidence of that, right? Like these people are fired up regardless, and it does, and in fact view this as a bit of a betrayal, right? So she's not going to draw benefit from those folks. Those are not her audience for this. And I do think, you know, and I would agree, like in the agreement, it does show like there was back and forth. There was like that paper part of the agreement. There was true negotiation there. But I'm not sure for her it is ultimately such a deeply risky political move. Like her whole political focus remains on fighting Ottawa, and she still reserves the right to return to that at any point. And so for her, she either gets one of two things. She either gets to claim that she's the one who got a pipeline built, even with, you know, with the Liberals in power in Ottawa, which is a get, or a year and a half from now, she gets to rail against Ottawa that it didn't come to fruition, and that they don't understand, and she gets to go back to all of the greatest hits. And I think that you saw her try to balance that out a little bit at the convention, where she had a tough job selling the MOU, but what was the headline that they generated out of it? Well, today she's going to war with the federal government about the gun buyback. So there's, you know, like that dynamic continues to be like absolutely politically essential for her. And I don't really see any sign that she's going to abandon it. I think that they're exploring this. They're going to see if this goes anywhere, and she will be able to draw a win out of it no matter what.
There's only one win for her, and it's not a perpetual fight. It's getting a pipeline built. Like that's like, make no mistake.
Well, she's gonna be long out of office
but
before
Jordan,
that ever
Jordan,
happens,
that's all like, it's sort of like, I think it's just bullshit to think that where Alberta's coming from is to you know, try to get a pipeline built, but then extract some victory out of it not happening. No. That's not what's going on here. They want to get a pipeline built. They absolutely want to get a pipeline built. And I think you're kind of seeing the opposite. You're seeing her hitch her wagon to Carney. And I think this is a joint project for them. There isn't a win for Carney and going this far down the road and then not having something happen and saying, oh, well, we tried, but there was no market for it. He is clearly, picking a path here to get something done. And she is doing the same. And whether they like it or not, they are business partners in this political venture.
But Kory, it's so unusual.
I don't think Carney sees
It's so
it that
unusual,
way.
so unusual,
I think he does.
so unexpected that they find themselves in that position. That there is no shortage out there of conspiracy theories on both sides about how this isn't what it appears to be.
Sure.
And how on the left, there's people justifying Carney, saying Carney's not really giving her a pipeline. There's a game of fucking wild,
I just
puts and takes going on in which he's got her in the end, and there's not going to be a pipeline, and
He gets carbon capture, there'll be no pipeline. Aha! Right? You're like, well, hang on a second. What carbon are they capturing if there's no pipeline?
It's a grand bargain, right? Like, where's the water and the wine from Alberta? It's that there are going to be emission controls, and there's going to be carbon capture and storage, which is going to be a very expensive venture to undertake. But there isn't going to be a fight with Alberta on that. Alberta is going to voluntarily do that. And on the flip side, they're going to get a pipeline, which they've wanted for a long time. So, it's a grand bargain. But let's make no mistake that both these folks have struck an agreement, and I think it's going to be full steam ahead to try to make that happen. Otherwise, what's the point of it? Like it makes no sense, I think, for either Smith or Carney to have this be a bullshit endeavor.
So we may say there's no politics in the Carney operation, but there must be some politics because when Peter Lougheed and Pierre Trudeau settled their fight over the National Energy Program, they got together and they toasted each other with champagne glasses. And that was a photograph that was, I think, posted on every poll in Alberta. I think it was pretty much the end of Peter Lougheed's career. He didn't run again after that. So they had better sense than to have Danielle Smith drinking champagne on this deal with
Right,
Mark
wearing
Carney.
a Down with Webster t-shirt. Rock on. I'm with you, Mark. Big Daddy, bring it to Alberta. Yeah.
And for
It's
more
all
of that
gonna-
kind
it's
of
all
detail,
gonna end
read the
in tears, friends.
read the Coots Diaries and listen to my interview with Ron Graham about the Coots Diaries. Let's go to Mr. Pinson. Gordon, can you assemble the team for us?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Well, I'm going to shock you all. I'm going to say something nice about Stephen Guilbeault.
Get the fuck out.
What?
I'm just going to close my laptop now. What?
Yeah.
I actually went and said hi to him at the press gallery dinner, and like, hey, I just want to introduce myself. He's like, oh, I know who you are. But I thought the way, this
Like the way Sonny Liston said that, to Cassius Clay in 1964. I know who you fucking are.
Anyway, I guess it already came out on the podcast, but I'll just echo in my hey you the point that I actually think the way that he has departed is showing a degree of class that I seldom display myself personally, but I appreciate the fact that he went out on principle, but he didn't go out burning the house down behind him, and I think that shows a level of maturity and classiness that speaks well of him. And so, hey, you, Stephen Guilbeault, we agree on nothing, but I like the way you exited.
So that's how it goes, Kory, when you don't send Andrew Scheer to talk to them.
Right. Yeah, it's opposite. Although that joke that Polyev made, I thought was quite funny.
I don't know it. What did he say?
Oh, what was the exact phrasing, Scott? Do you remember? It was basically that Workington and Scheer are the least two intimidating people in the world, and like Scheer has never intimidated anyone, and Workington looks like a poster child for long-term Ozempic abuse.
That's right. Yeah, there were many Workington, Scheer, Scott Reid hiding behind the curtains jokes, which of course make me uncomfortable.
Yeah, different Scott Reid.
Different Scott Reid.
Well, you're often
when you're hiding behind the curtain, it's like George Costanza in Seinfeld next to his mother in the hospital bed. Oh, people can look up that reference. Who else got a hey you?
Well, I got a hey you. So mine is to Tim Hodgson. So if the Carney government is indeed interested in getting to the finish line on a North Coast pipeline, which unlike my my colleague in the lower square here, I'm not so sure is actually the case. But if they are, then Tim and others like him really have to do a better job of dealing with engagement with First Nations. Like, there's just no way around it. In this case, the Coastal First Nations had asked for a meeting 2 months ago to meet with the minister about this potential MOU and what was going to happen. He got back to them on Wednesday. And then when they couldn't meet with 2 days' notice, made a really, really flippant comment on David Cochran's show about like, oh, it's called Zoom. Like, fuck around and find out, you guys. You may like it, you may not like it, but the Indigenous communities on the North Coast in BC hold all the cards on this project. And they will litigate it out of existence if they're not brought into it early and engaged in a real way. And that tone, that dismissal, and I know he subsequently apologized for it, but I want to underline it because I think it is so damaging to the prospect of any of these things actually getting done. You got to leave that at the door. It's not helpful.
You're here. Scott?
Well, mine is going to seem a bit anticlimactic after a couple of side references over the course of this pod, but I just and I am
that also is, brings to mind the George Costanza behind the curtain next to his mother in the hospital.
Enough. I'm not going to do that. My hey you goes out to David Herle. And the reason it goes out to David Herle is I want to call upon people who listen to our pod and all other pods, any political news or book publishing news. I just want to say go and listen to David's pod that dropped on the weekend with Ron Graham, author of the Coots Diaries. And I know people are getting sick and tired of hearing us talk about the Coots Diaries. I've become like a Jehovah's Witness. I'm going door to door to sell it now, right? May I speak with the lady of the house? I would ask you to please purchase Ron Graham's Jim Coots Diaries, Sunderland Publishing. But I loved the book, obviously. But then when the book is coupled with listening to you chat with Ron about putting it together, he's made me extraordinarily thirsty for the archives, because he talked about how much material he edited out and had to edit out. I feel like going and diving into the balance of the archives to see the rest of the diary entries. I can't. I'm sure that there's a political book that I've liked more over the course of my adult life. I can't remember a political book that I've been more enthusiastic about in years and years and years and years. And so I just want to say, listen to David's pod. Good on you, Dave, for getting Ron Graham to come on and talk about it. And Jesus Christ, Christmas is coming. It's the holidays. Purchase this book for your friends, your family, for anyone and everyone you know. I just love it.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever read the or seen the Ronald Reagan Diaries? Similar thing, but
No.
it's fascinating. Actually, if you're looking for another version of that, I recommend it. And actually, probably the most interesting thing in it, in some ways, is what a lengthy love letter it is to his wife, Nancy Reagan. Like,
Sure.
It's actually like it's very endearing. It's yeah. Anyway,
Unfortunately, part of Jim Coots' diaries is an extended, unrequited love letter.
Yeah, it's very, very. Yeah. Very troubling. He loves someone who didn't love him back. It's, a little bit, I'm not going to get into detail, but it's not unlike this pod.
My Hey You is also about a book, but it's a little more serious. My Hey You goes out to Thomas King. And I know that you're an elderly, and I'm described as somewhat of a Mr. Rogers figure, but still, go fuck yourself. Okay? Because you pretended to be Indigenous, and you wrote a book. I mean, you've done many things on the basis of being Indigenous. You got jobs, you written many books, but you wrote a book that I evangelized the way Scott evangelizes the Jim Coots Diary. You wrote a book called The Inconvenient Indian, and I was fooled by it. I thought it was full of insights, and I guess that's because it was one non-Indigenous person writing to another non-Indigenous person. But I really feel taken advantage of, and I'm fucking sick and tired of people pretending to be Indigenous to gain material career advantage. It's the most disgusting thing possible. And I don't care whether you're old when you get found out, it's bad. And Thomas King, I feel really aggrieved by you. Oh, there's my AU.
You're here.
there you go.
All right. Thank you, group, for being with me today. I thought it was a great conversation. Thanks all of you Kurz who watched or listened to this program today, and we'll be back with more before Christmas. I think we've got a couple of sessions before Christmas. By God, you can still fill your boots with Curse of Politics in December. Lots of it. See you guys in a week.